It's the last week of our journey through Trinitarian doctrine, and we come right up to date. But also, as so often, we look back down the centuries that have passed since God walked the earth in the person of Jesus Christ. We are delving into Givenness and Revelation by Jean-Luc Marion. This is quite a hard book, but it repays attentive reading. Also, hard as it is commendably short. Why not read the whole thing? Now, what you have to understand about Marion is that he occupies an unusual position, but a position from which he sees some interesting things. He is both a theologian and a philosopher. As a theologian, he is an Orthodox Roman Catholic. As a philosopher, he is a phenomenologist. Why is this odd? Well, phenomenology is a kind of philosophy that doesn't usually get on well with Christianity. So let me tell you about phenomenology and then show how Marion turns it round to say some really good things that need saying. The name we most associate with phenomenology is Martin Heidegger, a German who died in 1976. Heidegger is very influential and personally I would say not for the good. He feeds into Sartre and into a lot of the thought of the 1960s, which is either destructive or liberating depending on your point of view. Although he is a philosopher, his philosophy has implications for theology, and Heidegger is definitely pulling in a different direction from Karl Barth. Barth, for his part, very much has Heidegger in his gun sights. They are roughly contemporary with one another, but whilst Barth authored the Barmen Declaration, Heidegger joined the Nazi Party in 1933. By their fruits shall ye know them. What is Heidegger's philosophy? Well, there's a lot to it, but for what we need to get into, the clue is in the name, phenomenology. Heidegger thinks philosophy begins with phenomena, from the Greek phaino, I shine. He thinks things, experiences, events shine out and impose themselves, and that this is the starting point of our thinking. Our role is to attend and engage, and in this engagement we have to strip away interpretations, convention, even language. This way of looking at things is quite hard to square with a sensible Christian outlook. First, because it seems to locate ultimate existence with things and events. Second, because it is highly individualistic and against established collective ways of thinking and living. But what Marion picks up from this way of thinking is something different, which is also there. You remember the odd thing that happened around the 16th and 17th centuries as we moved from the medieval world into the early Enlightenment? Just when in science we were getting the idea that we are not at the centre of everything, at the same time in philosophy we were going the other way. For the last 400 or 500 years it's all been about my experience. That's where philosophy and theology start, right here. Descartes' starting point is I think, therefore I am. Schleiermacher, as we saw in week 5, starts with my feeling of absolute dependence. We start with ourselves, we work outward. And Heidegger says no, it starts with the phenomenon, out there. Not with my reaching outward, thinking about or looking for or having an intuition of the phenomenon, but with the phenomenon itself, out there. Point there somewhere, wherever it is. So, in a very odd way, this is leading us back to where we were with the medievals, that, as Coleridge says, all truth is a species of revelation. This is where Marion puts the two together. He says Christ is the ultimate, as he says, saturated phenomenon, the pure starting point, who shines in the darkness, whether we are there to see him or not. We do not seek to know him. He gives himself to be loved, and he comes among us to love us. Marion offers us a thoroughly baptized phenomenology, and personally I think he's rather wonderful. He brings out of this treasure house some really helpful concepts. Please look out for them and others you may spot as you read. His notion of the icon, in which we look at the Son and see the Father, is fascinating. And it comes with another way to account for the strange invisibility of the Holy Spirit that we have noticed in weeks gone by. We must of course not lose sight of Coakley's well-grounded observations about the struggles of a church preoccupied with order and run by men, to tune into pneumatology. But Marion has a really interesting line of thought that's different from this, about how the Spirit is in us, making us able to see iconically. And then, just as you don't see your sight, we thus don't see the Spirit. We see in the Spirit. Then again, Marion helpfully sets up two concepts of oneness. He contrasts unicity with unity. Unicity is simply being one of something. Unicity is the notion of oneness that underlies what he calls the monotheism of subtraction. But Trinitarian monotheism is a matter of unity, a oneness that is a uniting of more than one. As Jesus says, I and the Father are one. You will find many such good things as you read. You will need to concentrate, for though this is a short book, it is dense. But notice that no matter how complex his ideas are, he keeps bringing them back to the Scriptures, holding both in tension. See how he uses the Scriptures, and indeed how he uses citations from the Fathers and Karl Barth to triangulate what he is saying. Are these just window dressing? Or do they show clearly the foundations and integrity of what he is doing? If the latter, there is something to learn from him about how to write a good essay. Lastly, this book, with its very wide range of reference through the history of Trinitarian theology, is quite a good way to check that we have learned something in the last couple of months together. Do you understand Marion better than you would have in August? What do you understand now that you would not have understood then? I very much look forward to hearing what you make of Marion when we meet. Now, as this will be our last class together, I do want to put you on your mettle once more to grasp, before we part, the whole story arc of how the birth of a refugee baby to a teenage mother in a chilly outhouse in the Judean hill country made it necessary 2,000 years later for us to study the doctrine of the Trinity, and gave us a doctrine to study. The key thing I want you to take from this is that the doctrine is an attempt to say something about that which we are not really able to speak of. We're good at speaking about objects in the universe, but God is not an object in the universe. It is a long struggle, Trinitarian doctrine. It is a long struggle to open our minds wide enough to admit something of the immensity of God. Not that this is the only way to know God. God can reveal himself to us however he likes. But if we are going to share what we have known, we need the common currency of language. And that is the point of theology, a language to speak truly of God. It is not an easy language to construct, and it needs to be maintained. It is our job to maintain and use it. And to do that, we need to know where it comes from. Thus, at the start of the class on Monday night, I want to challenge you to recall this story in its entirety. I'm going to run over the events again now. So the rest of this video has no new material, just a restatement of what we have already covered. If you'd like a refresher, stay tuned, but don't feel you're missing out if you switch off now. Okay, still with me? Great. So one more time with three-part harmony and feeling. The events of the Gospels happened. Was this doctrine? No, it was stuff that happened. But when people came to give an account of it in the world around them, that was quite hard. So much had happened, and much of it seemed contradictory. And what was distinctive about the world in which they had to give an account of it? Well, it was a Greek-speaking world, a world of philosophy, analytical thought, argument. The story the church had to tell in this world was a Hebrew story, a story of law, people, place, obedience. Then within this culture there was conflict. Different people had different ideas how you tell the story, and they bounced off one another, each provoking the other to deep thought. Was there an orthodoxy defended by the fathers and challenged by the heretics? No. They were followers of Jesus, doing their best to say what that meant and who Jesus was, and the ones who won out, whom we now know as the fathers, were those who perhaps had the imagination to see a bigger world. Those whose ideas didn't make the grade we now think of as heretics. The key difference, as I say, between the two, well, there were many differences, but often we find the orthodox are the ones willing to sit with two seemingly opposed principles and admit they don't know how you reconcile them, whereas the heretic wants to choose one or the other. Heresy is often, although not always, but often a stable but wrong position, rather like the church clock that is right, exactly right twice a day but doesn't tell the time. We want to be a church clock that is never exactly right, but at least gives you a rough idea when morning and evening prayer are. Orthodoxy is a perilous balance, never precisely correct, but never letting go of any part of what has been revealed. So this struggle went on for hundreds of years. By the start of the 4th century at least, the questions were clear, and the biggest question of all was, is the Son of God co-eternal with the Father? This was the focus of the Council of Nicaea, assembled in 325 in large part to deal with the controversy sparked off by Arius, who taught that there was when he was not. Now, what was the most important thing that got into the creed at this point? The homoousion, the statement that Son and Father are of one being. And why was this controversial? Well, because scarcely 60 years earlier, Paul of Samosata had been condemned for the plainly wrong teaching that Father and Son were homoousios in the sense that God divided his being, placing some of it into Jesus. Yet there it now was, in the Creed. There thus followed a further 50-odd years of argumentation to try to work out how this could be. Who was the protagonist here? Why, the highly combative St. Athanasius. And what was his key contribution? The idea which he gets from Origen that the Son is eternally begotten but not following after. And who were the three theologians we now credit with the first tentative statements of how this all fits together? The Cappadocian Fathers, Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus. They taught respectively that the three persons were equal, but that the Father was the source of divinity, that the three persons acted together in a single action, and that the three persons were united in a perichoretic union, whatever that meant. Then the scene shifted to North Africa a further 50 years on. Augustine writes De Trinitate, and there are two really important things in it. What are the two important things in De Trinitate? First, the grammar of divine simplicity. God is simple, he is what he has. There are no accidents in God, no changeable surface qualities, yet Father, Son, and Spirit are all of one being, yet distinct. What distinguishes them? It cannot be their being, for they are homoousios. It cannot be anything transient or superficial, for nothing about a simple being is transient or superficial. No, they are distinguished by their eternal relations one with another. And then second, the psychological analogies. Lots of different situations we notice in our own minds where three distinct things are yet each of them the whole, the most famous being memory, understanding, and will. Now, fast forward to the Middle Ages. What has changed? Nothing fundamental. Many of Augustine's concepts have been helpfully elaborated and developed, though Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are now identified perhaps to a misleading degree with memory, understanding, and will. What is key in Anselm's outlook? Perfect being theology. Anselm says God must exist because God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, and God who did not exist would not be as great as God who did exist. This is closely linked to the concept of aseity, being sufficient in oneself, being a cause, not an effect. Anselm says God must have aseity because there has to be something that causes everything else. This is the basis of his doctrine of divine simplicity, with which he retells Augustine's story in full colour, as it were. And 200 years later, this is the same story Thomas Aquinas tells, again with more detail and subtlety, particularly when it comes to the processions. Thomas, however, has a greater volume of authorities and traditions to synthesize and reconcile, including the rediscovered Aristotle. In Thomas, we begin to see reason starting to play a dominant role in determining what is true. And this raises the curtain on the next stop, the 18th century, where we find a completely new world. What has changed? Well, now we are the centre of the universe. Anselm and Thomas knew that truth had to come from beyond us, and reason's job was to interpret and clarify. But now we think we can take hold of truth by independent thought and observation. 100 years on, and we have added feeling into the mix besides reason. So we come to Schleiermacher. What is odd about Schleiermacher's doctrine of the Trinity? He doesn't have one. Tacked on at the back of the book to be polite. Christ and the Spirit in the church are truly divine is all he wants to say, and he thinks that's not too hard. That sets the course for 100 years. Then what happens? The First World War. And who is watching all his Hegelian and Schleiermacherian professors sign up for this war? Karl Barth. And what conclusion does he draw? Their theology, if it leads to the Somme, must be wrong. In response, he says two things. First, God is in heaven and you are on earth. We are not in control of the truth. The more firmly we grasp the truth, the less true it is. And then this drives him back to the Trinity. God reveals himself. This is Barth's Trinitarian structure of revelation. God remains utterly beyond and unknowable. God comes into the world. God is in us the power to see the second and to know the first. And there is but one God. So, and this is one other huge important point to take home, the questions of what we know and how we know it are bound up with the doctrine of the Trinity. This brings us to the mid-20th century. Then we have seen 3 or 4, if we include Marion, contemporary theologians, all with their own way of talking about God as Trinity. Moltmann, with his challenging idea that the Son dies on the cross, not the death of God, but death in God, and the challenge this poses to the doctrine of divine impassibility, which we may or may not wish to preserve. Zizioulas, mining the Cappadocian Fathers and articulating his idea, for which he disclaims originality, helpfully summarized in the title of his book, Being is Communion. Copley, rereading the Fathers in a broader perspective, challenging them to return to the task they set themselves, but which, in part, because of the historic maleness of the Guild of Theologians, they have not completed, of giving a fully equal account of the disruptive and undefinable third person of the Trinity. And lastly, Jean-Luc Marion, of whom it remains to speak. Got all of that? Let's see if you have. I look forward to hearing your recitation of it on Monday.